The Pirate and the Witch of Tides. The sea was a vast, unbroken expanse of grey when Captain Elias Storm stood at the helm of the Scarlet Wave. The ship cut through the water with the grace of a predator, its black sails taut against the wind. Yet despite the ship's power, a creeping unease settled over the crew. Whispers travelled between them like ghosts, carried on the salt-laden breeze. Tales of the Witch of Tides had infected their minds, and even Elias, unshakable as he appeared, could feel the weight of the legends pressing against his chest. The Witch of Tides. A phantom who haunted the waves, they said. Her wrath as unpredictable as the ocean itself. She commanded the tides, steering them as she pleased, pulling ships into the abyss without warning. To sailors her name was a curse, but to Elias it was an affront. No sea witch would cow him, no matter how fearsome her reputation. He had plundered kings' coffers, faced death in every form imaginable, and walked away with his name etched into the annals of maritime terror. But even legends are not untouchable. The first sign of trouble came when the tides betrayed their course. What had been steady waters turned capricious, pulling the Scarlet Wave in directions no chart could explain. Then came the winds, howling without a storm, bending the masts and rattling the rigging like an unholy choir. The crew, hardened men who feared neither blade nor cannon, began crossing themselves and muttering prayers under their breath. Elias dismissed their fears. The sea is as restless as a dog that smells blood, he growled. Steady your hands, or I'll steady them for you. Still, his confidence wavered when the sea itself seemed to answer. It happened on a moonless night, the kind where even the stars seemed unwilling to pierce the darkness. Elias was on deck, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon, when the air turned bitterly cold. The waves flattened, unnaturally still, as though the ocean held its breath. Then came the sound, a low, resonant hum that seemed to rise from the depths, vibrating through the wood beneath his boots. He turned sharply, searching for the source, and saw her. At first, she appeared as little more than a shadow, her silhouette barely distinguishable against the black horizon. But then she moved, stepping onto the surface of the water as though it was solid ground. Her hair was long and dark, writhing like ink spilled in water, and her eyes glowed faintly, pale and piercing. She raised one hand, and the hum grew louder, a vibration that rattled the teeth in his skull. Captain Elias Storm, she said, her voice carrying over the unnatural stillness of the sea. You cannot outrun the tides, nor can you command them. The sea remembers all, even when you do not. Elias's hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword, but his fingers trembled. Who are you to threaten me? He demanded, his voice strong, but not unshaken. Her lips curled into a smile, sharp as a knife. I am the ocean's memory, its rage. You have stolen what was not yours, and the tides will take it back. Before Elias could respond, the calm shattered. Waves surged around the ship, monstrous and alive, lifting the scarlet wave like a toy. The crew screamed as the ship pitched violently, its masts groaning under the force. Through the chaos, Elias kept his eyes on the witch. Her figure standing impossibly still atop the roiling waves. Her voice reached him again, clear and unyielding. "You cannot escape me, Captain. I will come for what you owe." With a gesture of her hand, she vanished into the depths, leaving only the fury of the sea in her wake. The scarlet wave barely survived the night, limping into calmer waters with broken masts and a terrified crew. But the damage to the ship was nothing compared to the shadow that had settled over Elias's soul. He had seen many strange things in his time, but this was different. As dawn broke, Elias stood at the helm, his jaw clenched and his eyes burning with a mix of fear and defiance. The witch had marked him, and though he could not yet understand why, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not wait for her to strike again. "She wants me? Let her come," he muttered under his breath. Then, louder to the crew, "Set course for the Abyssal Isle. We hunt the Witch of Tides." The crew froze at his words, their faces pale as the sea mist. But Elias paid no heed to their fear. His course was set, his purpose clear. He would find the witch, face her power head-on, and end whatever hold she had over him. What he didn't know was that the tides were already pulling him towards her, toward answers he wasn't prepared to face. The scarlet wave sailed into uncharted waters, its course set toward the fabled Abyssal Isle. For days, the horizon remained empty, the sea stretching endlessly in all directions. But beneath the surface, something stirred, a presence that the crew could not see, but felt deep in their bones. Elias Storm stood at the prow, his sharp gaze fixed on the distant waves. The witch's voice still lingered in his mind, her cryptic words like a splinter he couldn't dislodge. "The sea remembers, even when you do not." What could she mean? He shook the thought away, focusing instead on the map clutched in his hand. It was old and faded, marked with jagged coastlines and cryptic symbols. The Abyssal Isle was drawn at the map's edge, surrounded by warnings. "Here, the tides betray." The crew grew restless as they neared their destination. The wind no longer filled the sails as it should, and the waves moved against them, slowing their progress. At night, strange noises echoed from the depths, a low, mournful keening that no one could explain. The men whispered of curses and omens, their fears simmering beneath the surface. Elias dismissed their murmurs, though even he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sea itself seemed alive, as if it were guiding them or warning them. And every night, as sleep eluded him, he heard her voice again, calling to him from the shadows of his dreams. They reached the edge of the Abyssal Isle on the 7th day. The island rose out of the water like the jagged spine of some ancient beast, its cliffs sharp and black against the grey sky. A thick mist clung to the coastline, shrouding the land in an eerie veil. The sea was unnervingly calm as they approached, the waves lapping gently against the ship's hull. But Elias knew better than to trust the stillness. He could feel the tension in the air, as if the ocean were holding its breath. "Captain, we should turn back," said Matthias, his first mate, his voice low and tight. "This place isn't natural. Look at the crew. They're on edge, and I don't blame them." Elias turned to Matthias, his jaw set. "I won't be cowed by stories and shadows," he said. "The witch is here, I can feel it, and I intend to face her." Matthias hesitated, then nodded grimly. "Aye, Captain. But if the men mutiny, it won't be the witch you'll have to worry about." Elias ignored the warning. He ordered the ship anchored just off the shore. The crew silent and tense as they worked. As the last of the ropes were secured, Elias turned to the men, his voice commanding. "I won't lie to you," he said. "This island is dangerous. But danger is what we do, what we've always done. You've followed me through storms and battles, and you'll follow me now. We're not leaving until we find her." The men exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. They knew better than to question Elias Stormer when his mind was set. Elias descended alone into the longboat, leaving Matthias in charge of the ship. He rowed toward the island, the mist closing around him like a shroud. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic creak of the oars. The closer he came to the shore, the heavier the air seemed to grow, as if the island itself resisted his presence. The boat scraped against the rocks, and Elias stepped onto the shore. The ground was black and wet, the jagged cliffs rising above him like sentinels. The air smelled of salt and decay, and the mist seemed to pulse, alive with hidden movement. As he ventured inland, the silence deepened. Even the sea's rhythm faded, leaving only the sound of his boots crunching on the rocky ground. Shadows shifted in the mist, their shapes elusive and strange. Elias gripped the hilt of his sword, his heart pounding in his chest. Then from somewhere ahead, he heard it. A voice, low and melodic, calling his name. "Elias!" He froze, his breath catching. The voice was soft, almost tender, but it carried an edge that set his nerves on fire. It was her. "Elias, you've come," the voice said again, closer now. "I've been waiting." He stepped forward, his sword drawn. The mist parted, and she appeared before him, her form ethereal and otherworldly. The Witch of Tides stood at the edge of a cliff, her dark hair swirling like smoke. Her eyes glowed faintly, piercing and unreadable. "You hunt me, pirate?" she said, her voice calm, but laced with something deeper. Amusement, or perhaps sorrow. "But you do not remember why?" Elias gritted his teeth, bracing his blade. "Enough riddles. What do you want from me?" She tilted her head, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Not what I want, Elias. What the sea wants. What it has always wanted." Before he could respond, the ground beneath him shifted. and the mist surged forward, engulfing him in cold and darkness. When the world settled, he found himself standing not on the shore, but in a cavern filled with shimmering light. The witch stood at the center, her expression unreadable. "Come," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "If you want answers, follow me. But know this, Captain. Once you step into the tide's memory, there is no turning back." Despite the fear gnawing at his gut, Elias followed her into the unknown. Elias Storm followed the witch deeper into the cavern, his footsteps echoing against the glistening walls. The air grew heavy with the scent of salt, and something else, something ancient, as though the very bones of the earth exhaled through the stones. The witch walked ahead of him, her movements unnervingly graceful, her dark hair flowing like tendrils of smoke. She never looked back, yet Elias felt her eyes upon him, as if she was studying his every thought. The cavern opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. A pool of still water dominated the center, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. The light danced across the walls, illuminating carvings that Elias couldn't comprehend. Spirals, waves, and symbols that seemed to pulse with life. It was as though the sea itself had etched its story into the rock. The witch stopped at the edge of the pool and turned to face him. Her eyes, glowing faintly like pale moons, met his. And for a moment, Elias felt as though he was standing on the edge of an abyss. "You've come far," she said, her voice soft yet resonant. "But your journey is only beginning. Do you know why you are here, Captain Storm?" "I'm here to end this," Elias said, his voice hard. He tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. "You've cursed my ship, haunted my crew. Whatever debt you think I owe, I intend to repay it. With your death." The witch tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You think yourself a hunter, but you are blind to the truth. The sea remembers, Elias, even when you do not." She gestured toward the pool. "Look, and you will understand." Elias hesitated, his instincts screaming to resist. But something in her voice, something ancient and commanding, drew him forward. He stepped to the edge of the pool and gazed into its depths. The water was impossibly clear, revealing a reflection that was not his own. The image shifted, and Elias saw himself as a child, standing on a sunlit beach. The waves lapped gently at the shore, and the air was filled with laughter. He recognized the scene instantly. It was the day his village had been destroyed, the day the sea had turned against them. He watched as the memory unfolded. The waves rose, without warning, towering over the village like a wall of liquid glass. The screams of the villagers were drowned by the roar of the ocean. Elias saw himself swept away, a small figure clinging to a piece of wreckage as the storm raged around him. And then he saw her, the witch. She appeared in the water like a phantom, her hair flowing around her, her eyes glowing with the same pale light. But she wasn't the monster he had imagined. She reached for the boy, reached for him, with a tenderness that made his chest ache. The waves obeyed her, carrying him to safety, even as the village was swallowed by the sea. The vision faded, and Elias staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "What? What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling. You saved me." "I spared you," the witch said, her voice heavy with meaning. "Your village was destroyed because of their greed, their betrayal. They stole from the sea, taking what was not theirs to take. The tides demanded justice." Elias shook his head, his mind reeling. "Number? That's not possible. My family, they wouldn't..." The witch stepped closer, her eyes piercing. "Your parents were among those who betrayed the sea, Elias. They took the relic, the Pearl of Tides. It is an ancient artifact, a bond between the ocean and its guardian. Without it, the balance was broken, and the sea's wrath was unleashed." The words hit Elias like a blow. He sank to his knees, the weight of the revelation crushing him. The faces of his parents flashed in his mind, their smiles now tainted by the knowledge of their guilt. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know." "The tides do not forget," the witch said, "but they are willing to forgive. The relic is aboard your ship, hidden among your plunder. Return it, and the balance will be restored. Refuse, and the sea will claim everything you hold dear." Elias looked up at her, his eyes filled with turmoil. "And if I agree, what happens to me?" The witch studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "The sea does not demand your life, Captain. Only your honor. The choice is yours." Elias rose to his feet, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and resolve. He had spent his life chasing wealth and power, but now he saw the cost of his ambition. The scarlet wave had become a vessel of greed, a symbol of the very sins that had doomed his village. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "I'll return the relic, but if the sea takes my ship, my crew..." "The sea will only take what is owed," the witch said. "Nothing more, nothing less." With those words, the cavern began to dissolve, the light fading as the mist crept back in. The witch's voice followed him as the world shifted around him. "Remember, Captain, the tides will test you. Only the worthy may return what was stolen." When Elias emerged from the cavern, the island's mist had grown thicker, the air colder. The scarlet wave waited in the distance, its dark silhouette barely visible through the fog. But something had changed. He felt it in his bones. The sea was watching, and it would not be kind. Elias Storm returned to the scarlet wave with the witch's words ringing in his ears. "The tides will test you. Only the worthy may return what was stolen." The mist clung to him as he climbed aboard, its dampness sinking into his bones. The crew, pale and tense, turned to him with wary eyes. They had felt the shift in the air, though none dared speak of it. "Captain," Matthias began, his voice low, "what did you find on that island?" Elias met his first mate's gaze, his expression grim. "Truth," he said simply. Then louder, so the crew could hear. "There's a relic aboard this ship. A pearl, black as the abyss. It's cursed the sea against us, and we must return it." The crew muttered uneasily, their fear palpable. "You mean to say we've been hauling a cursed thing all this time?" one sailor asked. "And you didn't know?" Elias's jaw tightened. "I didn't, but now I do, and we're going to make it right. The relic stays aboard no longer than it must. Anyone who stands in the way of that will answer to me." The men fell silent, their unease mingling with reluctant trust. They had followed Elias through storms and fire, and though they feared the relic, they feared the sea's wrath even more. The search began. The ship's hold, dark and cluttered, seemed to stretch deeper than it ever had before. Every crate, every chest was overturned, their contents spilling across the wooden floor. The crew worked in silence, the air heavy with tension. Elias prowled the hold like a caged animal, his eyes scanning every shadow. At last, it was Matthias who found it. Beneath a false panel in one of the captain's own trunks, the pearl lay nestled in a bed of velvet. It was no larger than a man's fist, but its presence was overwhelming. It seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive, its surface impossibly smooth and dark. The air around it grew colder, and the light in the hold dimmed, as though the pearl drank it in. Elias stared at the object, his throat dry. He had carried it for years, unknowing, its weight hidden among his ill-gotten treasures. Now it seemed to mock him, a reminder of all he had stolen and destroyed. "It's unnatural," Matthias muttered, his voice barely audible. "It doesn't belong in this world." "No," Elias said, his voice hard. "It belongs to the sea, and we're going to give it back." As they emerged onto the deck, a low rumble rolled through the air. The sea had turned unnaturally calm again, its surface like black glass. But the calm was not reassuring. It was oppressive. A silence that pressed against the eardrums and made every breath feel like a struggle. The sky darkened, though no storm clouds gathered. The crew exchanged uneasy glances as they carried the pearl to the bow, its faint glow casting eerie shadows across their faces. Elias took it in his hands, its cold weight sending a shiver up his arms. "What now, Captain?" Matthias asked, his voice taut with fear. Elias stepped to the edge of the ship, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Now we give it back," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, the sea began to churn. The stillness shattered. Waves rose around the scarlet wave, towering and wild, though no wind stirred the sails. The crew scrambled to secure the ship, shouting to one another over the deafening roar. But it was no ordinary storm. The waves moved with purpose, slamming into the hull with calculated force, driving the ship into the heart of the chaos. Then, from the water, they rose. Spectral figures, pale and translucent, their forms shifting like smoke. The crew froze as the apparitions stepped onto the deck, their eyes glowing with a cold, eerie light. They were sailors, those lost to the sea. Their tattered clothes clung to their ghostly bodies, and their faces were etched with anguish. One of them stepped forward, his voice a low rumble that seemed to echo from the depths. "You carry the debt of the tides, Captain. The sea will judge your worth." Elias stood firm, though his heart thundered in his chest. He gripped the pearl tightly. It was cold seeping into his skin. "The relic will be returned," he said, his voice steady. "But the sea must take it. I cannot." The spectre tilted his head, as though considering the words. "The sea demands more than the relic," he said. "It demands you." The crew gasped, their terror spilling over into shouts and chaos. But Elias raised a hand, silencing them. He stepped forward, meeting the ghost's glowing gaze. "Then take me," he said. "But leave my crew. They have no part in this." For a moment, the sea fell silent. The waves stilled, the spectres frozen in place. Then the ghost smiled, a chilling, sorrowful expression. "The tides remember sacrifice," he said, "and they reward it." The waves surged again, but this time they did not strike. They lifted the scarlet wave gently, cradling it like a child. The spectres faded one by one, their forms dissolving into the mist. As the last of them disappeared, the pearl in Elias's hands grew warm, then vanished, dissolving into droplets of seawater. The storm passed, and the sea returned to its natural rhythm. The scarlet wave, battered but intact, drifted on calm waters once more. Elias sank to his knees, his strength drained. He felt the witch's presence before he saw her voice soft and resonant. "You have done what many could not, Captain. The tides have forgiven you. Sail wisely." When he looked up, she was gone. Only the endless horizon remained. The scarlet wave drifted on calm waters, its once fractured masts swaying gently in the windless expanse. The crew, shaken but alive, moved about the deck in reverent silence. For the first time in days, the oppressive weight of the sea's judgment seemed to lift, though its memory lingered like a shadow. Elias Storm stood at the bow, his hands gripping the weathered railing. The warmth of the vanished pearl still lingered in his palms, as though the relic had left its mark upon him. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for... what? He didn't know. The witch's voice echoed in his mind. Sail wisely. What did that mean for a man like him? A pirate whose name was etched in blood and gold. Could such a man truly chart a different course? Matthias approached, his boots heavy against the deck. The first mate, usually confident and commanding, looked as though he had aged a decade in the past hours. He stopped beside Elias, his voice low. "Captain, the men are restless. They've seen things they'll never forget. We've all felt the sea's anger and mercy." Elias nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "The tide spared us, Matthias. That's more than we deserved." Matthias hesitated before speaking. "What now? Do we return to what we were? Or Do we let the sea's mercy change us? Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to face the crew, his voice rising above the murmur of the waves. "Men!" he called, and every sailor turned to him, their eyes wide with expectation. "You've seen what the sea is capable of. Its rage, its power, its grace. We've carried a curse aboard this ship for years without knowing it. And we've paid the price. But today, the tides have forgiven us. They've given us a second chance." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "What we do with that chance is up to us. We've spent our lives taking, plundering, stealing, leaving ruin in our wake. But the sea has shown me something I didn't want to see, that we're no different from the ones who betrayed it long ago." The crew exchanged uncertain glances. Elias's words were not what they expected from the captain who had led them through fire and fury. But there was a quiet conviction in his tone, an undeniable truth. "We've been spared," Elias continued, "and I won't squander that mercy. From this day forward, the scarlet wave will no longer be a scourge of the seas. We'll sail not to destroy, but to restore, to protect the waters we once disrespected. If any of you wish to leave, I won't stop you. But those who stay, you'll sail under a new banner, a banner of redemption." For a long moment, silence hung over the deck, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves. Then, one by one, the crew nodded. They were sailors, hardened by a life of danger and loss. But the sea's judgment had left its mark on them too. They had glimpsed something beyond the mortal world, something vast and incomprehensible, and it had changed them. The scarlet wave sailed on, its course no longer bound by greed or vengeance. Over time, the ship became a legend of a different kind. Villagers once terrified of its approach now welcomed it, its crew bringing aid to those ravaged by storms and pirates alike. Elias and his men used their knowledge of the sea to guide lost vessels to safety, to map treacherous waters, and to protect the fragile balance of the ocean they had once defied. But Elias's journey was far from over. Though the witch no longer haunted his dreams, her presence lingered in the edges of his thoughts, a reminder of the debt he had repaid and the duty he now carried. The tides were watching always, and he would not forget their lesson. Years passed, and the scarlet wave became a myth. Sailors spoke of a black-sailed ship that appeared in times of need, its captain a shadowy figure with eyes like storm clouds. Some said he was cursed, others that he had made a pact with the sea itself. But those who met Elias Storm knew the truth. He was a man seeking redemption, not for himself alone, but for all who sailed beneath the waves. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias stood alone on the deck. The sky blazed with hues of orange and gold, reflected in the glassy surface of the water. He closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of the waves, the heartbeat of the sea. "You've kept your promise," a voice said behind him. Elias turned, his breath catching. She stood there, her form as ethereal as the mist that had surrounded the abyssal isle, the Witch of Tides. Her dark hair flowed like water, and her glowing eyes held a faint warmth he had not seen before. "I didn't expect to see you again," Elias said, his voice quiet. "I told you the tides remember," she said with a faint smile. "They remember sacrifice, and they remember redemption." Elias nodded, his chest tightening with unspoken emotion. "Have I done enough?" "For now," she said. "But the sea is vast, Captain. Its memory stretches far. Keep sailing and keep listening to the tides." With that, she vanished, her form dissolving into the golden light of dusk. Elias stood in silence, the weight of her words settling over him. Then, with a deep breath, he turned back to the horizon. The scarlet wave sailed on, carrying with it a new legacy. A legacy born not of plunder, but of purpose. And as the tides whispered their eternal song, Elias knew he would listen, always, 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 always.